Welcome to this ASQ webcast presentation on Kaizen Kanban, a visual facilitation approach to create prioritized project pipelines. I'm Pablo Vibes with ASQ, and today we have with us presenting on this topic Fabrice Bouchereau. Now, a little bit about Fabrice before we get things started. Fabrice is a licensed industrial and systems engineer, facilitator, and trainer with 18 years of experience managing improvement projects and teams. He's founded Houston-based Process Then Consulting, and his experience changing company corporate culture and improving processes covers a broad range of industries, including healthcare, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, textiles, transportation, oil and gas, and energy. And he's fluent in English, French, and Spanish, and has delivered training in the United States, the Caribbean, Mexico, and Latin America. He's a frequent conference speaker at world and regional conferences for organizations such as ASQ, the Houston Project Management Institute, HR Houston, and various universities. And last but not least, he's a published author, most notably of ASQ's recently published book, Kaizen Kanban, a visual facilitation approach to create prioritized project pipelines. Fabrice, thank you so much for offering to walk us through this valuable topic and your book. Now let me pass it over to you to get things started.
Thank you, Pablo. It's a real honor for me to be here sharing Kaizen Kanban with all my friends at ASQ. Today we will be attacking Kaizen Kanban on 3 different aspects. What we're hoping to accomplish at the end of this training is for people to know a little bit more about how to leverage fundamental tools to identify opportunities for improvement. In other words, we're going to take some tools that you might be very familiar with and repackage them and group them in a way that will help us accomplish new things. We're also hoping that all our participants will be able to explain the difference between the 5 types of Kaizens and that they will be able to create a prioritized project pipeline. That's our action plan for today. Let's get started. First question I have for everybody is, why are you working on the impactful projects you thought you would be working? A lot of us, when we joined the workforce, we were expecting to work on projects that matter. But that's not what happened. A lot of us, due to business pressures, find ourselves fighting fires and getting rewarded for it. And the more we get rewarded, the more fires we see. And we find ourselves kind of in this cycle where we're trying to constantly find ways to fight fires and slowly forgetting our dreams of working on impactful projects. And to make matters worse, when we finally get to work on those projects, they fail. Sometimes we're unsuccessful. Through my 18 years of experience, I started talking to a lot of my students and understanding why is it that sometimes it is that your projects don't work. And this is what I've typically found. We come with 3 different reasons why programs such as Six Sigma or Lean initiatives that are fundamentally great programs sometimes fail. And most of the time they fail for 3 reasons. The participants don't exactly know where to start. And that's despite the instructor's best intentions and best efforts trying to provide the participant with the best tools. Another major contributor to those programs' failure sometimes is poor project selection. Very often you may have a participant start a project, they'll start a Six Sigma project just to find out a couple of stages later, for example, they're in measure or analyze, that in fact, there was already a solution and they should have been focusing on change acceleration processes or implementation versus going a full Six Sigma project. And by far, the biggest contributor that I have noticed to why projects fail is lack of facilitation skills. As instructors, we do a really, really good job making sure that our students know what the tools can do and what they can deliver. However, the challenge that we sometimes have is we don't tell them how to facilitate using the tools. We will tell somebody, you should use a SIPOC. They will know exactly what a SIPOC does, but we don't necessarily teach them how would you use it in a classroom. Our intention today is to help with the facilitation. But before we do all of that, let me give a little bit of background and explain why we chose the name Kaizen Kanban. Traditionally, a Kaizen is a team event to break apart something and rebuild better, in particular focusing on processes. A Kaizen, we will try to find a process, we'll take it apart, analyze it, and put it back together in a way that it will function better. That's a typical name of Kaizen. A Kanban is a traditional, another Japanese word, which is used for communication boards. Typically, a Kanban would tell an employee what project to work, what tool to go pick up next, or what part to retrieve. We've decided to combine both of them, as most of us are doing more and more projects. Wouldn't it be great for us to know what projects to work on next? And a Kaizen Kanban ends up being a communication board that tells every employee what they should be working on next. What does that have to do with the success of our Six Sigma projects, of our lean initiatives? Several things. First of all, remember we mentioned one of the biggest problems was poor project selection. Today, we're going to go through a process to get to the Kaizen Kanban that will help us identify which projects we want to work on. We will also be helping the students learn how to facilitate using some of the tools, therefore eliminating the second problem we had mentioned. So what are the characteristics of the Kaizen Kanban? First of all, it's a communication tool. It is something that you have on a wall with a list of projects that anybody can see and choose from. Another thing is, a Kaizen Kanban follows the traditional Kanban principles. We leverage them. We don't necessarily change how a Kanban works. We just changed it from retrieving tools and parts to choosing which projects to work on next. The Kaizen Kanbans are visible to all employees in the organization. They are not just limited to upper management or to shop floor production employees. Everybody gets to see it, gets to understand it, and understand where each project comes from. And another thing, another advantage of a Kaizen Kanban, it helps coordinate not only the project selection, but also the execution based on a prioritization matrix where we look at the complexity and the return on investment. How would we accomplish this? As I mentioned earlier, a Kaizen Kanban not only is the output, which is the communication board on the wall, it's also the process to get to that output. And that process is constituted of several tools. And these are the tools that we will be following. This is our roadmap. Our roadmap consists of, we're going to start with a process map. So we have an idea of all the steps involved in the process we're analyzing. We're going to look at the value-add, non-value-add analysis just to determine what adds value. Based on that information, we will build on it to create a SIPOC. And all of this is being done on the wall, and that's the magic of Kaizen Kanban, is everything is done very visually on the wall, and everybody can participate. Once we have the SIPOC and we know what our inputs and outputs are, we will go and give a little bit more definition. We will specify a little bit better what our inputs and outputs are supposed to be. Once we know what our inputs and outputs are supposed to be, we will be very well equipped to create an FMEA, where we'll do a failure mode and effect analysis, where we will look for each step how they could fail. This will allow us to identify a lot of opportunities for improvement. Once we have all those opportunities for improvement, then we can prioritize them and organize them in the Kaizen Kanban. Let's start at the beginning. Value-add, non-value-add analysis. As you can see here, my value-add, non-value-add analysis is built directly on a process map. So your team will have completely done a process map using Post-its or using a whiteboard, And directly there, we will be able to go and look for each step. Is it a value-adding step or non-value-adding step? The biggest reason we do that, this is our first look at our process in detail. This is when we will first start having the opportunity to say, can I eliminate this step? Can I reduce it? At that point, we're not looking for solution. We just want to notice them. And for each of those steps that we feel we should have, that we have an idea, we will write the idea on a Post-it and we will put it right next to that step on the wall. Before I go on forward explaining a little bit more about how we use SIPOCs, I just want to talk a little bit about a traditional SIPOC and what it does. Traditionally, SIPOC is a tool used to help understand what are the suppliers' inputs, output, and customers of each step of a process. As you can see on the screen, all your processes are in the middle on the column that says process. In this case, we were looking at the process of manufacturing a bicycle. You will notice that to manufacture a bicycle, among other things, you need boxes, paints, and tubes. The problem is, this tool, the way it's used here, you don't know what are the inputs for painting or what are the inputs for wheel installation. You just know that there's one input that's called paint and another one that's called tubes. And the same thing can be said about the outputs. One of the outputs is wheels and another one is frames, but we can't clearly tell the linkage between that and the process where they come from. And that typically has been one of the limitations of a SIPOC. The technique we're going to use, and I have a picture for you to show here in the next slide, you can see that this is a gentleman that is doing a process map directly on a wall. And as you can see, we have a very long Post-it looking things. This method, what we're going to show you, our enhanced SIPOC, will allow you to not only know what the supplier input, output, and customer for each step is, you will put it with the step. So when you have to paint a bicycle, you will know that at the stage called painting, the input is actually paint. And the tool that allows us to do that is here on the right-hand side. This is our enhanced SIPOC box. We have printed those to make it easier when we're doing those projects. The first thing that we will do, and this is a form that we use in several iterations. The first thing we will do, as you can see on the left-hand side, we have our traditional process map. Our process map here, you will see, it seems like it has about 16 steps. For each of those steps, we will create one of the cards that you see on the right-hand side, and we will write just the verb and the noun. You notice for a process map, everything is written in the verb-noun format, such as receive order, prepare traveler, cut tubes. For each of those, we will create one of those forms, and we will put it directly on the wall. Once we have put all of them on the wall, we will do our value-add, non-value-add analysis by adding this green dot that you see right next to verb-noun on the wall. Let me just get a highlighter to mark that. You will see verb-noun, and you will see the green dot for value-add, and if it was non-value-add, we would put a red dot. The next thing that we do, the next step that we do, and this is an opportunity to tell you about a good facilitation technique, is contrary to a regular SIPOC, we ask who's the process owner and who is the process operator for each of those steps, one by one. The reason we do that is because different people in the organization may refer to the same process based on who they know. If you speak to a supervisor, he might tell you the supervisor for receive order might be Paul, and the supervisor for send frame might be Jake. On the other hand, if you ask an operator, he might tell you, oh, the person that does receive order is Paola, and the person that sends the frame is Bill. And you might think, wow, there's a discrepancy. In fact, it's the same process, just one of them is the process owner, maybe the supervisor, and the process operator, which is the person that actually does it. By taking the time to add those 2 extra bits of information, you will save yourself a lot of time from discussing, from people having to debate who does what. Once you've identified that, then we will go and follow the same process we normally use for a SIPOC. For each step, we will ask what goes in it, in other words, what's the input, and who provides it, who gives the input, that's the supplier. Once we do that one by one again, we will go back at the beginning, and for each step, we will ask, what comes out of this step? And who gets it? To give you an idea, I'm going to step to the next slide and then we'll come back. You can see this is, we took a process map and we created those forms for each of the steps. This is going to be what a final product is going to look like. Let me go back to the details a little bit now that you've seen this. Once we know who the supplier, the input, the process, the output, the customer are, one way to make sure that we have not skipped anybody and to also at the same time start identifying opportunities for improvement is to ask for the step we're looking at, who does it? Who does this step? Sorry, and not who does it. Why do you start doing this step? How do you know that this step needs to be done? I'll give you an example. If your job is to paint a bicycle frame, how do you know a frame that's presented to you is ready to be painted? That's called your trigger. We will typically work backwards, start from the last process, and move all the way forward asking, how do you know to start this process? And very often we will find that there's not a set process. Every time we don't know for sure why we start a process is an opportunity for us to potentially create a system or a mechanism to let the process operator know that it should be done. Each of those opportunities we will capture, as you can see in this slide, we will capture it using a starburst. The starburst should not have a solution. It's more of an observation for an opportunity for improvement. You have identified that at this step, we don't know when to start. Think of those starbursts as a series of ideas that you could put in a parking lot. And instead of putting them in a remote parking lot, you're keeping them on your wall, close to the steps to which they relate, so that everybody can understand the correlationship between that starburst and the process step. Once we have identified all our opportunities for improvement, another thing that we should do before I go there, I almost forgot to tell you, very important part. Once you've done all the triggers, the next thing you would look at are clearly defined requirements for your inputs and clearly defined requirements for your outputs. What do I mean by that? Let's say that our process was to boil water. If I tell you, how can that process go wrong? Most people would say, well, you know, you need 3 things to boil water: a container, a source of heat, and the water. And I ask them, how can this break? They will say, well, if you don't have a container, you can't do it. If you don't have heat, it won't work. And typically that's where people would stop. On the other hand, if you tell the people, what are my inputs? And they say water, you say, I would like more details. And they end up telling you, I need 16 ounces of water at this purity level in a glass container. When you have to look for failure modes to see what could go wrong, then the person can say, I had more than 16 ounces, or I had less than 16 ounces. The water was not pure. It was in the wrong type of container. As you can see, we have made it possible for people to come up with a lot more possibilities. a lot more potential opportunities for improvement, and that's what we want to do. And this information is placed directly, again, on the card, so it's always in context. Having all this information comes really handy when we have to do an FMEA. An FMEA traditionally is a failure mode and effect analysis. For those of you who have participated in FMEAs, you probably remember how frustrating it is. Just like in the picture you see here, you typically have a poor soul that usually is the person that doesn't even know how to type, that's trying to type, and everybody else is telling them everything that could go wrong. This lasts for about 5–10 minutes before the person typing usually gets frustrated and walks away, and the next incompetent typist is placed in that person's place. After a couple of rounds of this, people start losing interest, and the FMEA loses a lot of its value. We have come up with a way to help everybody participate and keep their interest. The failure box. As I mentioned, everything we're going to do, we do it directly on the wall. And the failure box is not an exception. The failure box allows you to go and ask all the FMEA questions and put them directly on the wall. So imagine if you have a process that has 30 steps and you have a team of 9 people. You could break up your team in 3 different sections, 3 groups of 3, and assign 10 steps to each of those. As you can imagine, the FMEA will be completed much faster. And the fact that you don't have only one person typing and that you're using those cards, all 3 people from each team, so basically all your 9 participants, can be writing failure mode cards and putting them up. And it goes much faster. And because it is in context, you typically get better results. People will answer the same typical 5 questions. What could go wrong with this step? That's the failure mode. The effect will be determined by asking the question, what would happen if this failure did occur? How often does this failure occur? How bad is it if it happens? And also the last step, detectability, which is how easy will it be for you to know that it did happen? On this slide, you can see that we have added all our failure boxes directly on the wall as part of our analysis. So just to recap here, you have a process map. On the process map for each step, it's basically a SIPOC, where the red and green dots will indicate that you've done your value add, non-value add analysis. You also have right next to each step the failure mode cards for those, so letting you know how each of those steps could fail and what the effect would be. And as you're doing this, every time you think of a potential opportunity for improvement, you put a starburst next to that step. You're starting to really build a good pipeline of potential projects, because each opportunity for improvement could become a project. Why do we do all of this? We do all of this so that we understand everything that could go wrong with the process. That's the first part. And the second, probably the most important part, is that we can easily bring in a manager or a supervisor or whoever can decide which projects need to be done. You bring that person there, and very quickly, with context and information, you can bring the person up to speed. And that person, using the information they have available to them, would be able to choose what are the best projects to do. Very often, we don't have as much time or as many resources as we would like to do the projects. And in order to help that manager prioritize for us better, we're going to leverage the 80-20 rule. Now that we've identified all our opportunities for improvement, all our failure modes, we need to remember that 20% of those problems could give us, by addressing them, 80% of the results we're looking for. And so we're going to choose the top 20% as indicated by the FMEA. Not that the others are not important. Consider them being in limbo right now, or better yet, in a parking lot. We're going to take the top 20% that we found. So let's say we had found 100 opportunities for improvement. We're going to choose the top 20. And for those 20, what we will do is we will write a problem statement. As a quick reminder, a problem statement needs to tell you who is affected by the issue or who discovered it, the issue or the trend. What is the problem that we're looking at? When did this problem happen, or when was it discovered? Where did the problem happen, or where was it discovered? And the extent or the magnitude of the situation. Once we've written our problem statements for the selected opportunities for improvement, then we can take a pick chart to categorize them and start prioritization. A quick refresher for those of you who may have not used a pick chart in a while. A pick chart is a very simple 4-cell matrix that allows us to determine the payoff versus the difficulty in pursuing a particular project. When you have a low payoff, I'm looking at the bottom left quadrant, low payoff and low difficulty, that means this is a project that's possible, that we could consider doing. It doesn't have a big return on investment, a big payoff, but we could do it. When you go in the upper left, it has a high payoff and a low level of difficulty. These are the projects that give us the biggest bang for our buck. These are the ones we should be pursuing. The challenge is the cell that's on the top right-hand side. These are projects that are still worth doing because they have a high payoff. However, they have a high level of difficulty. On the last quadrant, bottom right, kill, these are the projects that have very low payoff and very difficulty. These are the things we should try to avoid doing unless we're mandated to do it by regulations. Then we will have to do them. How do we use all this information? Let's go to the next slide. We're going to adapt this. For each of those 20 problem statements that we've created, we will ask the following questions. The first thing we're going to do is determine where would they fall on the implementation difficulty. We have arbitrarily decided to create implementation difficulty and make it a little bit more mathematical. We've decided the difficulty is the time multiplied by the resource type that you need to implement it. As you can see, we will ask, will it take a long time, medium time, or short time to implement the solution? What do you need? Who do you need to implement it? An individual, which is a 1, just a localized team, which is 5, or is it a little bit more difficult and you need a full cross-functional team, which would be a 9. When you multiply the 5 by the 9, it gives you where you want to be on the horizontal axis. We did the same calculation for benefits using the delay and the magnitudes. Once we do the multiplication, we can find where our y-axis is, our y-coordinate is. And at the point where our y and our x-coordinate, this is where we would put the project. Let me illustrate with the next. So what that does, that allows us, if we take all 20 opportunities for improvement and we use that, we will place all of them at different levels in our priority matrix. We will know which ones are possible, which ones are a challenge, and which are the ones we should implement. Before I move on, I have to give you a little bit more background about different Kaizen types, because now that we found those opportunities for improvement, those top 20, we would have to address them. We're not just trying to identify problems just to identify problems. We would have to see how would we solve them. And as most of you may have heard, most managers will say, don't come with just your problems to me, also come up with a solution. In this case, we have identified the opportunities for improvement. We are also going to come up and identify the methods we would use, what we think would be the best way to solve that problem. Therefore, satisfying the managers that we not only found a problem, we came with a solution. Before we do that, let's do a quick review about Kaizen. It was a surprise to me a couple of years ago when I discovered that there are actually 5 types of Kaizen. For the longest time, I learned Kaizen is a 4-day event. As it turns out, if we take the time and look a little bit deeper, we can find out that there's 5 types of Kaizen. The first one is an individual workstation. It's a Kaizen done at an individual workstation. This is called a point Kaizen. These are typical things that we do a lot when we're doing some 5S. This is when you're eliminating waste, when you're trying to put tools in the right location, make some ergonomic adjustments, and install some guards so you can have everything poka-yoked and kind of error-proofing. This is a great project for somebody that is a new practitioner. And this is how we relate it to our pick matrix. Remember, we had all the projects placed on the pick matrix. If we know somebody's a new practitioner, most likely we would like that person to have something that is low risk and low effort, and that gives us some benefit. So we're looking for something that's possible at the lower left quadrant. On the other hand, if the person is very experienced, and I will jump a little bit forward and I'll come back, that the person has done several projects and that the person can do very difficult projects, these are the projects we would address by an experience, such as a black belt or a very experienced lean practitioner. But between the point Kaizen and the most complicated one, which is a supply chain Kaizen, there are 3 other Kaizens, and I will go over them very quickly. The second Kaizen is a mini Kaizen. This is typically the individual now starts looking at an entire work cell. This is when you start looking at workflow, cell layout, line balancing, and 5S. Once you've done a couple of those, once your practitioners get more comfortable, some of them would be better equipped to do a Kaizen blitz. Typically the ones that most of us may have been taught to do, lasting in a format of 4 days and we solve the problem. This is when we start looking at complex local issues and typically have a team form just for this event. Another Kaizen that is more and more popular these days, particularly in the service industry, are flow Kaizen. This is when you're looking at the value stream. This typically requires you to have a cross-functional team because it goes across departments. You're looking at system issues and process issues. And finally, the most complicated type of Kaizen is the supply chain Kaizen. The supply chain Kaizens typically involve customers or suppliers and often happens across several companies or several plants. On the slide here, you can see how the Kaizen types fit in a pick matrix. This is not a rule. This is what we have noticed as we've done many projects, and we've used the calculation to see where to place them in the pick matrix. The point Kaizens are typically possible. Mini Kaizens and Kaizen Blitz usually are fairly not difficult to implement and have a very high payoff or high benefits. These are the ones that we would encourage most people to do. The more challenging Kaizens are reserved to more experienced practitioners. Once we have all this information, then we can go and present it to our managers or to the value stream owner or to the process owner so that they can look at all the 20 projects we have, where they would fall in the pick chart, and they can decide based on company core values or company key performance indicators or major company initiatives, which project they would like us to select. Once they've made the selection, they've confirmed, and keep in mind we've presented them this list of projects in a certain level of priority. Once they've looked at it and they've approved it, for each of those, we will create a Kaizen Kanban card. At this point, it's just the Kaizen title, the problem statement that you've already written, and a quick business case. Without a business case, we cannot really confirm this is something that needs to be done. And the business case will be refined very often by the sponsor to which we present it so that they can prioritize for us which one to do. We will take each of those cards and we will place them in our Kaizen Kanban. A Kaizen Kanban can be done very easily. Sometimes I've even done it with stapling manila folders to an envelope. What we are trying to accomplish with the Kaizen Kanban is create a structure where it's visible to everybody what projects need to be done. And also, as you can see here, we have 5 different columns: Point Kaizen, Mini Kaizen, Kaizen Blitz, Flow Kaizen. By having them organized like that, it's very easy for an instructor that just taught a group of students the first lean class to encourage them to go do a Point Kaizen, because that's quick, it's low risk, and the student will have the opportunity to see how the process works. On the other hand, if as an instructor you had people that have been doing Kaizens for a couple of years or that have acquired a certain amount of experience, you can encourage those people to do a Flow Kaizen or a supply chain Kaizen. What you're trying to do is make sure your inexperienced people are working on entry-level projects, Point Kaizens, which might still yield a lot of benefits, they just are not too complex, and reserve your more complicated projects for people that have already mastered a lot of the tools. And these are the people that would be doing your supply chain Kaizen. You will also notice that we have red, yellow, and green under each of those. In some companies, they decide we want to not only know what's an easy project versus a more complex project, we would like to classify what's the project that's going to affect us for safety and should be done right away. This would be your red, the cards that will be put in the red slots. Yellow could be a general efficiency improvement. And green could be the projects that have been deemed to have the highest impact on return on investment. There are many different ways to organize it. The most important thing is to be consistent and to make it visible to everybody in the organization. In conclusion, we reviewed how we could leverage fundamental tools such as process mapping, value-add, non-value-add analysis, and SIPOC. We used a faster and better approach to facilitate, where we did everything on a wall using a very low-tech and high-touch methods, such as using Post-its, such as using tape and paper. And then we created a prioritized project pipeline, and we explained the difference between the 5 types of Kaizens. That's it for me, Pablo. Thank you very much. I don't know if anything else you would like to add to this.
That was a great presentation, Fabrice. Thanks again on behalf of the ASQ community for sharing it with us. I really liked your walkthrough of the 5 types of Kaizen and the various matrices. Really good stuff. So if you ever want to come back, you are welcome to present again. For those of you that want to learn a little bit more about Fabrice or you want to just connect with him, you can email him at fab@processzen.net. You can also check out his website, which has lots of different resources on it as well, and that's www.processzen.net. You can call him directly if you have questions about this process, and that's 305-761-6600. And you can, of course, find his new book, Kaizen Kanban, which is a visual facilitation approach to create prioritized project pipelines. That's at ASQ's bookstore at www.asq.org/quality-press. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about this topic through ASQ's Knowledge Center, you can go to asq.org/knowledge-center. And lastly, if you'd like to present on a topic to our quality community of hundreds of thousands of professionals, or you'd like to sponsor an event or maybe even share this through an intranet, you can contact me, pbias@asq.org, and I'd be happy to help you with that. All right, thanks again, everyone, and we hope to see you at our next webcast event.